Hi everyone, my name is Avery and welcome to my channel where we talk about ways that you can be more strategic as a student, get those grades, enjoy life, and be efficient with your time. So today what I want to talk about is test taking, and specifically I want to talk about the importance of simulating test taking conditions. I think this is something that most students overlook, or maybe they know they should do it but they just don't. And I get that because it's hard, but I want to talk about why it's important and some ways to do it because I really believe in this. So first of all, let me just tell you a little bit about why you should listen to me and why my advice is even relevant. So I did a 4-year undergraduate degree, I did a master's degree, I did a law degree, and in all of those, there was obviously a lot of tests, right? But I think what's even more helpful is I've written quite a few standardized tests. I honestly quite enjoyed the challenge of it. It gives you something specific to focus on. Anyways, I wrote the LSAT, I wrote the MCAT, and those are both, if you are aware and if you've written them, they're long tests, they're intense. The LSAT's 4 hours, MCAT 7 hours, and they're really marathons. They're endurance races. And for standardized tests, I think simulating test-taking conditions is even more important. So my advice might be geared towards those longer tests. This would apply if you're taking the SATs. I would imagine if you're taking the GMAT, I haven't taken those, but I would imagine it would be useful. So what do I even mean by simulating test-taking conditions? What I mean is that you want to practice, okay, so first of all, I hope you're doing practice tests. And if you're not doing practice tests, you got to do practice tests because the way to study for the exam is to study what the exam is going to be like, right? Would you practice for golf by doing basketball? No, right? If you're going to be quizzed at the end of the semester in math, you're going to have a calculus exam. Just reading the textbook and just relaxing, it's not very efficient. You want to be practicing the kind of problems you're going to see on the exam. My dad has said, I think I said this in another video, sorry, but practice makes permanent. It doesn't make perfect. So whatever you practice, you're gonna just get really good at doing whatever that is. So why don't you make sure that you practice the right thing, which is the test. So anyways, I'll let that go. Hopefully you should take practice tests. And this is especially important if you're taking a standardized test. So one of the first reasons why it's really good to simulate test-taking conditions is that, especially when it comes to a big test like the LSAT or the MCAT, a lot is riding on it, right? You might have studied for a long time. This is your dream of, becoming a lawyer, a doctor, whatever. There's a lot riding on it, and these tests are intense, and everyone's nervous, It'd be strange if you weren't nervous, and that's totally normal. But the thing is, I'm sure you all know this, but if you get too nervous, that can be bad. You can end up choking because you're just so nervous that you can't even focus, and it's overwhelming, the pressure. And I get that, and that's why you need to simulate test-taking conditions. Because the reason is, if you are able to kind of imagine that you actually did the exam 100 times, in the exact same conditions, in the exam, but it didn't count before you did the exam. Don't you think you'd feel a bit more relaxed? Yeah, because you're used to it, right? It's the unexpected that can really throw you off. But the more comfortable you feel with something, that'll decrease your nerves on game day. And yeah, I want to say something about nerves right now is actually having a little bit of nerves is good. Your performance, there's a curve that shows this. Your performance increases with nerves because you get that adrenaline going, you have that energy, you're competitive, you're ready to go. But then once you get too nervous, you plummet. Your performance goes down. So you want to be at that sweet spot. So tell yourself, if you are a little nervous, remind yourself it's okay to feel nervous. Because sometimes if you get nervous about being nervous, and you get more nervous. So you know what? It's okay to be nervous. It's good to be nervous. But if you get overly nervous, this is one reason why simulating test-taking conditions can be super helpful. Okay, so now I'm going to go into what I even mean by simulating test-taking conditions. So first of all, obviously you're going to do the test. Let's take the MCAT. Let's talk about the MCAT. I think that's a good example. So you want to get some past exams. It depends on what you're doing, but if it's the MCAT, there are past MCAT exams available. You buy them. You want to have as close to the actual exam as possible because the questions will be similar, right? You don't want to buy third-party exams. You want to get the real official ones. Sometimes you run out of options. I did. There's only the MCAT committee. They only release so many official ones. LSAT, you'll never run out. There's like 80 practice LSATs, you know? And honestly, you got to aim to do, okay, I'm not going to say how many you have to aim to do because it depends on your goal score, but you should be prepared to do 80 if you have to. If that's what it takes, you should be prepared to do that. I think I did that many or something. So, and it was worth it. It paid off. So the point is you want to get the official exam. That's the first thing. The next thing is with these standardized tests, maybe the hardest thing is the timing. The LSAT, the timing was brutal. You have 35 minutes per section. You're under a time crunch. Most people could do much, much better if they had unlimited time. MCAT, similar thing. I think the time pressure is a bit worse on the LSAT. But so you have this time pressure, and on top of the time pressure, it's a long exam. The MCAT, you're in there for 7 hours. You get breaks. I'm going to get to that. Short little bathroom breaks, a lunch break, but you have to be focused for a long amount of time. So the next thing that you need to do when you simulate test-taking conditions is you have to simulate the time. Now, I know how tempting it is to, you're doing the test, and I would say use a timer and say how long you're supposed to have per section. You have to follow that. But it can be really tempting to say, I just got to go to the washroom. I'm just going to pause the timer, go to the washroom. And I've done that. I'm not going to lie. But you know what? That does not help you. It didn't help me because during the exam, you can't pause. You can go to the washroom, but that's going to take time out of your exam. And that's why you have to be prepared for things like that, which I'll get to in a bit. But the point is, if you cheat on time by pausing or whatever, or you're like, say you're almost done a question and the timer goes off and you say, I'll give myself 30 more seconds. Because there's not going to be 30 more seconds on the exam. So you got to be strict with yourself if you want to see the best results possible. So I think that gets me to my next point, which is the breaks and also things like going to the washroom. I don't know I guess it depends who you are. I drink a lot of coffee, and maybe you have to go to the washroom a lot. You're one of those people. Like I probably end up like going to the washroom every few hours. And on these tests, you can only you can only have breaks at specific times. And you can leave the room, but say it takes 5 minutes to exit the room, go to the washroom, come back. Those 5 minutes are crucial. Like every minute counts in these standardized exams. So one thing you have to consider is your fluid intake, right? And so that's why you want to simulate these conditions. So part of that simulation includes writing a test at the same time that you're going to be actually writing it and eating the same foods, the same breakfast, right? Like say, for example, that you are going to take the test at 6 a.m. in real life, but you don't really want to wake up at 5 a.m., to practice. You're like, I'll just write it at noon. But the thing is, you're going to be, imagine at 6 a.m., maybe you'll wake up, you'll have a bunch of coffee, and then you'll have to go to the washroom during the test. And you're surprised because when you practiced it at noon, you'd already been up for a few hours, and then your body had been in a different rhythm. So that's why it's really important to plan out what you're going to eat, when you're going to wake up. You want to have those set. And also when it comes to food and drink, you want to know what works best for you, right? You want to have I'm not going to say what you should have, but there are some foods that might be too heavy and that might make you kind of groggy, or, maybe you're lactose intolerant. Obviously don't have any lactose then, but you have to know what's going to work best for you. And some people make this mistake, I think, of, it's game day for whatever it is. Maybe it's a big race and they're like, okay, if this is a big day, I'm going to go do something extra special and have an extra special meal. No, that is the last thing you should do. You should have the same meal that you always have. Don't change up things before game day. When I was practicing for an interview I had actually, I was working with some consultants and they wanted to do a different style of interview before the interview, and I was like, no, I want to practice what the interview is going to be like, right? So you want to eat the same things that you're going to eat on the game day. You want to wake up at the same time, make it as close to the thing as possible. And you want to figure that out. You want to figure out what's the ideal amount of fluids for you to have, how much coffee. You don't want to be too jittery, but you want to be alert. Also, you have to figure out what time to wake up. If you're not a morning person, you might have to wake up a few hours early to get ready, right? Okay, so waking up, food, timing, we've talked about those. Okay, now we'll get a little bit crazy, get a little bit into the weeds. It depends how seriously you're taking this test, but I'm just going to give you all the tips about, like, if you're really aiming to do the best you can, you want to simulate as much as you can. So let me tell you about a little study first to back this up. So they've done studies that have shown that somebody, imagine this is pretty crazy, somebody is drunk and then they memorize something, they learn something. Later, they test that person's memory. They test it two ways. One time, they test it that person's sober, and then another way, they test it getting that person drunk again. And guess which way is better. Like, in which situation is that person more likely to remember? When they're drunk. And that seems surprising because obviously the takeaway isn't that you can remember things better when you're drunk, because that's absolutely not true. But the thing is, when they initially learned the material, they were drunk, and that's like a cue, and so that helps you remember. And this has broad reaching implications. For example, with addicts, it's often recommended that they stay away from usual places that they used to drink at, used to do drugs at, because seeing those familiar symbols, signs, people, smells of the bar, even just a certain sound, a certain clink of a glass, it can bring them back, and it can bring back those memories. And this has to do with classical conditioning and psychology, and you know what, I won't get into that too much now. But the thing is, you associate a lot with the context in which you learn something. You're making associations with everything else. So that being said, you want to, when you learn the material, you want to ideally, and when you practice it, you want to have as many of the same situations and like same environmental factors as when you write the test. So one thing you can do, wear the same clothes, that's what I did. I'm going to wear this dress on the day of the exam. Then every time I do a practice test, I wear that. That also helps you be more comfortable. And like when you put it on during game day, you're like, I know what I'm doing. Your body can almost just go through the routine without getting stressed. It's normal. I mean, think about all those athletes who do crazy little routines before. Like, I think Michael Phelps, he listens to a specific song and he does some little I don't know, he does some kind of specific thing. And is that a coincidence that one of the most successful Olympians of all time no, and he's not alone. Most professional athletes have some kind of routine, and that really gets them in the rhythm. Okay, so there's that. Something else you can do, you can visualize. Visualizing is key. And so there's only so much you can simulate, right? Like, you might not be able to, it'd be cool if you could take your practice test in the room you're going to take the actual exam in, but obviously that's often not the case. But what you can do is you can visualize you're in that room. You sit down, and that's what I did before I wrote the MCAT. I visualized myself. Before I wrote the MCAT, I would sit down, before I wrote my practice MCAT, and I would visualize the day of the exam. I visualized myself walking into the room, the receptionist, all these things. I mean, you have to know what's going to happen, and actually I was doing this visualization after I'd written it and was preparing for potentially a retake, but I didn't need to retake, so that was good. But I was visualizing what would happen. And the thing is, this is crazy. Every time I learn this fact, I'm like, I need to remember this because it's so powerful. But when we imagine something, our brain can't really tell the difference between whether we're actually doing it or imagining it. So, they've done studies where people will visualize themselves shooting basketball hoops, and then other people will actually just shoot the basketball hoops. And the people who visualized are almost just as good as the ones who actually practiced it, right? I mean, what a great deal. You can get all this practice with just sitting there and visualizing. It's a great deal. But the thing is, visualizing is hard. You have to really concentrate. You have to really try. And the more vivid you can make it, your imagination, the better it will be. And I love these psychology anecdotes. Hopefully I'm not boring you here. But if you guys have heard of mirror neurons, they're neurons in our brain, which are brain cells, and they light up when we see somebody else doing something. And mirror neurons are one reason why, when somebody else yawns and then you yawn, it's because you're lighting up in response to what they're doing, right? And that kind of shows you how our brains, it's like we see them and we think it's us. Visualizing is the same kind of idea, right? And actually, that's one reason why mimicking somebody's body language is a useful kind of technique to kind of create that sense of, shared empathy going on. So, visualization, it's it's key. Honestly, everything happens in our mind. Just think about that. Think about dreams and how real they feel. The same areas of our brain light up when we do something versus when we visualize it. So another thing I like to do is not just visualize the day of walking in, because that helps you get comfortable. You got to visualize yourself killing it. Visualize yourself like writing the exam and being like, yes, I got this, and feeling good, feeling motivated. You want to feel that like feeling of success. Feel that feeling of success after you walk out of the exam and you're like, crushed it. Really happy with that. That's really important. Also, one thing you want to do is I think you want to visualize and rehearse what you're going to do if something goes wrong. What I mean by that is maybe like on the MCAT, there's 4 sections. Maybe one of the sections, it's going to go badly, right? Like maybe you're just like, oh, I just don't get this passage on archaeology. And that'd be in the CARS reading section. I just don't, what's going on? And you completely, like, you get flustered and you bomb it. That, you know what you have to do? After that section is done, you have to say, you have to let it go and you have to move on to the next section. And I know that's really hard. It's really hard. But if you ruminate about the past section, you're going to tank your entire performance. So when you visualize, you want to also visualize, imagine if you did bomb, what would you do? Visualize that you would tell yourself, it's okay, we're moving on, what's done is done, let's keep going. Set it aside, keep going. So that's really important. And also to visualize what you're going to do if you get a hard question. I like to kind of have that in mind. I say, okay, you know what? It's okay. I'm not expecting it to all be easy. Set that question aside, come back to it. If you just imagine that it's going to be super easy and then you start the exam and it's way harder than you thought, you might be thrown. So you need to prepare yourself for those kinds of setbacks. And so that brings me maybe to my last point, is that on one hand, I've been talking about how you want to simulate test conditions, but you also want to simulate variability in a sense, because if you're expecting things to be exactly a certain way and then you walk into the exam and they're not, you might be thrown. You might be like, this is not what I imagined. When people have like really rigid expectations and then those expectations are broken, that can be bad. So one thing you might want to do, for example, you're probably practicing in, I would imagine, in silence, right? What if during the exam you have some neighbor beside you who's sniffling, who has a little cold, or they're tapping their foot like a maniac, That would be annoying. And if you have only practiced in dead silence, that might be enough to throw your concentration. And that would be understandable. So what you have to do is you should practice in some settings where there is distractions. Maybe practice in a noisy Starbucks one day. Practice, among other people. So that's more to do with distraction, but you want to make sure that you're ready to adapt to the circumstances. You can't be like, things have to be exactly as I imagined or I'm going to freak out. No, you got to prepare yourself for different situations. So I'll leave you guys with that. Those are my tips for simulating test-taking conditions. Super important, especially when it comes to standardized tests, because standardized tests, also the simulation, it builds your endurance, right? And if you, here's one more thing. With the LSAT, there's always this bonus section that isn't marked, but you don't know which one it is. So you write 5 sections, but only 4 count. And I know a lot of people, when they write practice exams, they'll only write the 4 sections because they know the 5th one wouldn't count. But the thing is, on the day of the exam, you don't know which one that is. So you have to rate them all with 100% effort. So when you practice only 4, you're making it easier for yourself, but then when you do it on game day, it's going to be harder. So you can't do that. You have to really fully go for it. And I know that's tough because writing that extra section, especially when you know you're not going to mark it after, it's a bummer, it's harder, but you're not doing yourself any favors by practicing in an easier way and then having it harder when it actually comes to the test, because then you won't be ready. You can do things also if you want to even make it harder for yourself and study under more time pressure, things like that, or study extra sections to extend your endurance. But yeah, this video was really just about simulating test-taking conditions. So here are the things I would think about. You want to take the full test. You want to take it, you want to not cheat on breaks. Don't give yourself extra time. Don't cheat on breaks. You have to follow the timing. You want to wake up at the same time that you're going to wake up. Take the test at the same time it's going to happen. You want to eat the same foods that you're going to eat. Also, the day before, the night before, do the same things. Have a routine in place, have an exercise routine in place. You want to maybe get a ritual going if you can. If not, that's okay. Wear the same outfit. Know what snacks you're going to bring. if it's a standardized exam, know exactly what you're going to do, visualize, and also be prepared for setbacks. Be prepared for a little bit of variability. So maybe practice in some louder situations. Don't always practice in the exact same place, because if you practice in the exact same place, you're going to get used to practicing in that place, but that place isn't where you're going to be taking the exam. So actually, it would be good to practice like in different rooms of your house, right? Unless you're taking the exam from home. Like say I'm recording this right now during COVID and everything. I'm not sure. I wrote the MCAT in person, but I'm not sure. But if you're writing the exam virtually, then yes, practice the exam how you're going to write it. But if you're going to be writing in a different building, you want to practice in different places so that you're ready to adapt. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you guys found it helpful. And thanks for tuning in. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and thanks for checking in.